The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched for miles in every direction. Thousands of seats rose from the floor like steps on a mountain, and in each seat sat a representative from a different species. Some had scales that shimmered like oil on water. Others had bodies made of living crystal that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows. A few were nothing more than clouds of gas held together by their own willpower. They had all come here, to this station at the center of the galaxy, to decide the fate of civilizations. Ambassador Verlox of the Cathari Dominion stood at the speaking platform in the center of the chamber. His species had ruled 1,000 star systems for 10,000 years. They had crushed rebellions, absorbed smaller empires, and bent the laws of physics to their will. The scales on his body were deep purple, a sign of noble birth, and his eyes glowed with the cold light of a species that had never known true defeat. Honored members of the council, Verlox began, his voice amplified by technology so ancient that no one remembered who had built it. I come before you today to discuss a threat to our way of life. A murmur passed through the chamber. The representatives leaned forward in their seats, curious about what could possibly threaten beings as powerful as themselves. I speak of the species called humanity. The murmur turned into laughter. Soft, clicking, buzzing laughter from 1,000 different throats and vocal organs. The humans? The soft, short-lived creatures from the outer spiral arm? They had only been part of the galactic community for 87 years. In the eyes of species that measured their histories in geological ages, humanity was barely more than newborn infants stumbling around in the dark. Verlox waited for the laughter to die down. I understand your amusement. But consider this. In less than a century, humanity has established colonies on 47 worlds. They have built a trade network that rivals our own. They have developed technologies that our scientists cannot fully explain. They are clever monkeys, the Vorn delegate interrupted. The Vorn were insectoid creatures, their bodies covered in black armor that made them look like walking nightmares. Clever, but ultimately insignificant. That is exactly what concerns me, Verlox replied. They do not know their place. 3 cycles ago, they refused our trade monopoly. They built their own shipping routes. They made alliances with species we had kept isolated for centuries. They act as if they are our equals. High Arbiter Morvana shifted on her throne. She was older than most star systems. Her body a lattice of crystal that had witnessed the birth and death of entire civilizations. And what would you have us do, Ambassador? Verlox's eyes narrowed. I propose that we teach them humility. A coordinated campaign of psychological pressure, trade sanctions, diplomatic isolation, public mockery. We will show them that they are nothing in the grand scheme of the cosmos. We will break their spirit before they become a true problem. The chamber fell silent. This was not an unusual request. The established powers of the galaxy had used such tactics before, against dozens of rising species. Some had been broken. Others had been absorbed. A few had simply given up and faded away. It was the natural order of things. In the far corner of the chamber, the small section reserved for minor species, Ambassador Linda Patterson of Earth listened to every word. She was 63 years old, with gray hair that she refused to dye and lines on her face that told the story of a life spent in service. She had been a soldier once, then a diplomat, and now she was the voice of her entire species on the galactic stage. Beside her sat Captain Samuel Ortiz, her military advisor and oldest friend. He was a broad man with dark skin and darker eyes, and he had seen things in his 50 years of service that still woke him up at night. He had fought in the border wars against pirates who used asteroids as weapons. He had negotiated with species that considered humans to be food. He knew better than most how dangerous the galaxy could be. They're going to vote for it, he whispered to Patterson. She nodded slowly. I know, should we say something? Object? Patterson watched Verlox return to his seat, watched the other delegates nod and click and pulse with approval. No, she said quietly. Let them have their vote. Let them think they've won. The vote was not close. 700 species voted in favor of the campaign against humanity. 312 voted against. mostly smaller species who remembered what it felt like to be on the receiving end of such treatment. The rest abstained, unwilling to take sides. When the result was announced, Verlix allowed himself a smile. The humans would learn their place. They would be humbled, controlled, made to understand that there was a natural order to the galaxy, and they were at the bottom of it. "Hi, Arbiter." Morvana struck her staff against the floor, a sound like thunder that silenced the chamber. "The motion is passed. Let the record show that the Galactic Council has authorized psychological operations against the species known as humanity. May wisdom guide our actions." Patterson rose from her seat, and for a moment, every eye in the chamber turned to her. She was small by galactic standards, fragile-looking, with a lifespan that most species considered tragically brief. But there was something in her posture, something in her eyes, that made even Vrelix hesitate. "Ambassador Patterson," Morvana said, "do you wish to address the Council?" Patterson looked around the chamber at the thousands of beings who had just voted to break her species. She thought about the history that they did not know, the wars that they had not seen, the darkness that humanity had survived and overcome. "No, High Arbiter," she said calmly. "I believe the Council has made its position clear. We will take this information back to Earth and respond accordingly." She turned and walked toward the exit, Ortiz falling into step beside her. The delegates watched them go, some with satisfaction, others with pity. Poor humans. They had no idea what was coming. As the doors closed behind them, Ortiz leaned close. "What's the plan?" Patterson kept walking, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. "We go home. We tell them what happened. And then we wait." "Wait for what?" She stopped at a window that looked out over the stars, billions of points of light scattered across the void. Somewhere out there, 8 billion humans were going about their lives, unaware that the galaxy had just declared war on their future. "We wait for them to make a mistake," Patterson said. "And when they do, we remind them why they should have left us alone." She turned away from the window and continued walking, leaving the light of 1,000 civilizations behind her. On Earth, the sun was rising over a world that had survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, plagues, and wars. It would survive this too. It always did. The campaign began 3 days after the vote. It started small, as such things always do. A human cargo ship was stopped at a Kethari checkpoint and held for inspection. The inspection took 17 days. By the time the ship was released, its cargo of medical supplies had spoiled and its crew had been treated like criminals. On the Veshan homeworld, a human artist named Kevin Brooks was scheduled to display his paintings at the Grand Exhibition, the most prestigious art show in the sector. The night before the opening, the Shen officials announced that his work had been rejected. Primitive scrawlings, they called it. The finger paintings of a species barely past its cave-dwelling phase, at diplomatic functions across the galaxy. Human representatives found themselves seated at the back of the room, served last, spoken to with barely concealed contempt. When Ambassador Patterson arrived at a trade summit on the Vorn homeworld, she was asked to use the servants' entrance. She used it without complaint. Back on Earth, in the underground command center beneath the Rocky Mountains, Admiral Gregory Cole read the intelligence reports with growing concern. He was a tall man in his 60s, with white hair cut short and blue eyes that had seen too many battles. He had commanded fleets, won wars, and buried friends. Now he commanded the entire United Nations Space Defense Force, and he was watching his species be humiliated on the galactic stage. "They're escalating," said Commander Maria Santos, his chief of operations. She was 30 years younger than Cole, with sharp features and sharper instincts. "The provocations are becoming more severe." "More public?" Dr. Henry Liu nodded from his seat at the corner of the table. He was the foremost expert on alien psychology, a man who had spent his entire career trying to understand how other species thought. "They're following a pattern," he said. "The same pattern they've used against every rising species for the last 50,000 years. Isolate, humiliate, break. And if the target species fights back," Cole asked, "and they have an excuse to destroy them. Either way, the problem is solved." Cole was silent for a long moment. "What do you recommend?" Liu took off his glasses and cleaned them, a habit he had when he was thinking. Nothing yet. We endure. We wait. We let them think their plan is working. People are suffering, Santos objected. The crew of that cargo ship spent 17 days in detention. Our artists are being mocked. Our diplomats are being treated like animals. I know, Liu said softly. And every single one of them understands what's at stake. We've prepared for this, Commander. We've been preparing for this since the day we made first contact. On the colony world of New Portland, in a small schoolhouse at the edge of a wheat field, a young teacher named Katie Morris gathered her students around her. They ranged in age from 6 to 12, the children of farmers and engineers and shopkeepers who had come to this world seeking a new life. Miss Katie, a boy named Danny asked, "Why are the aliens being mean to us?" Katie looked at her students, at their innocent faces full of confusion and hurt. She had known this day would come. Every human had been taught the contingency plan since childhood, hidden in lessons about history and cooperation and patience. "Because they're afraid of us," she said gently. The children looked at each other, puzzled. Afraid? But they're so much bigger than us, and they have more ships. And they've been in space for thousands of years. Katie smiled and knelt down to Danny's level. "Do you know what makes humans different from almost every other species in the galaxy?" The children shook their heads. "We never give up," Katie said. "No matter how bad things get, no matter how hopeless it seems, we keep going. We adapt. We survive. And the other species know this. They've watched us for 80 years, and they've seen what we can do. It scares them, so what do? A girl named Sophie asked. "We wait," Katie said. "We stay calm. We don't let them make us angry. And we remember who we are." The provocations continued for months. A human colony world called Haven was denied emergency medical supplies during an outbreak of Decian fever. The disease was not native to humans. It had been carried by a Thesian trader who had violated quarantine. 43 people died waiting for medicine that never came. On Earth, there were protests. Some people demanded war, immediate and total. Others demanded surrender, acceptance of whatever terms the council offered. But most people simply went about their lives, waiting, watching, preparing. In the factories of the Pacific Industrial Zone, workers built ships that no one outside of Earth had ever seen. In the laboratories of the European Science Consortium, researchers perfected technologies that would change the nature of warfare forever. In the training centers of every major city, volunteers learned skills that they hoped they would never have to use. Admiral Cole watched it all from his command center, receiving reports from 100 worlds, processing information from 1,000 sources. The galaxy thought humanity was broken. The galaxy thought humanity was weak. The galaxy had no idea. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Cole received a message from Ambassador Patterson. It was short, just 3 words. How much longer? Cole looked at the status reports, at the readiness assessments, at the final preparations that were almost complete. He typed his response carefully. Soon, stay strong. Crossed the galaxy in her quarters on the diplomatic station. Patterson read the message and allowed herself a small smile. Soon, it was almost time. In her classroom on New Portland, Katie Morris tucked her students in for their afternoon nap and looked out the window at the endless fields of wheat. Somewhere out there, beyond the blue sky and the stars, a galaxy was learning a lesson about patience, and humanity was about to teach them. One about consequences. The night was coming, but dawn always followed. It always did. 6 months had passed since the Galactic Council had voted to humble humanity. And Ambassador Vrelox was confused. He stood in his private chambers on the Cathari homeworld, staring at reports that made no sense. The humans should have been broken by now. Every other species that had faced this treatment had cracked within weeks. They would fight among themselves, blame their leaders, demand peace at any cost. That was how it always worked. That was how it had worked for 10,000 years. But the humans were not fighting. They were not blaming. They were not begging. They were quiet. Too quiet. Our intelligence networks report increased activity in human space, his aide informed him. Military installations have gone dark. Research facilities have tripled their security. Commercial shipping has decreased by 40%. Vraylox turned from the window. What are they building? We do not know. Our spies cannot get close enough to find out. The humans have become extremely careful about who they allow into their territory. They are hiding something.
Yes.
Yes, Ambassador. But we cannot determine what. Vraylox dismissed the aide and sat alone in the darkness of his chambers. For the first time in his long career, he felt something he had not experienced before. It took him several minutes to identify the emotion. It was fear. On Earth. In a facility buried deep beneath the mountains of Switzerland. Dr. Patricia Vance stood before the culmination of 3 decades of work. She was 55 years old, with gray streaks in her brown hair and the tired eyes of someone who had not slept properly in years. Behind her, a team of the greatest scientists humanity had ever produced watched in silence. The device in front of them was not impressive to look at. It was a sphere, perhaps 2 meters in diameter, made of a metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. There were no obvious controls, no displays, no moving parts. It simply sat there, humming with a power that made the air itself feel heavy. Project Awakening, Patricia said softly. 30 years. 12 failed prototypes. $200 billion. And it's finally ready. Admiral Cole's holographic image flickered to life beside her. He was in his command center, as always, surrounded by screens, showing the status of human forces across the galaxy. You're certain it works. We tested it on an asteroid last month. A rock 3 kilometers across. It ceased to exist in less than a second. Not destroyed, Admiral. Removed. As if it had never been there. Cole was silent for a long moment. And you can scale it up? The sphere you're looking at can remove a small moon from existence. We have plans for larger versions. Much larger. God help us, Cole whispered. Patricia shook her head. God has nothing to do with this, Admiral. We built this ourselves. And we built it because we knew someday someone would try to destroy us. We just hoped that day would never come. On the diplomatic station at the center of the galaxy, Ambassador Patterson requested a private meeting with Vraylox. The Cathari ambassador agreed, expecting to finally see the humans beg for mercy. He prepared a list of demands: trade concessions, territorial surrenders, public acknowledgement of human inferiority. He was looking forward to the conversation. Patterson arrived alone, wearing a simple gray suit that made her look more like a schoolteacher than a diplomat. She carried nothing but a small data crystal in her hand. Ambassador Vraylox, she said, sitting across from him in his luxurious office. Thank you for seeing me, of course Vraylox replied, barely hiding his satisfaction. I assume you have come to discuss terms of surrender. Patterson smiled, a small, sad expression that Vraylox did not understand. Not exactly. I have come to give you a gift. She placed the data crystal on the table between them. What is this? History, Patterson said. Our history. The parts we don't talk about at diplomatic functions? The parts we hoped we had left behind? Vraylox picked up the crystal, turning it over in his clawed hand. Why would you give me this? Patterson stood and walked to the door. Because I want you to understand something, Ambassador. We came to the stars hoping to make friends, to learn from older and wiser species, to become part of something greater than ourselves. We believed in the promise of galactic civilization. She paused at the door, looking back at him with eyes that suddenly seemed much older than her 63 years. You took that hope from us. And now, you need to understand what you're dealing with. She left without another word. That night, alone in his chambers, Vraylox activated the crystal. What he saw kept him awake until dawn. He saw trenches stretching across a continent, filled with dead bodies and poisoned gas. He saw cities burning, their populations reduced to shadows on the walls. He saw mushroom clouds rising over civilian populations, turning millions of lives to ash in an instant. He saw humans fighting humans with a ferocity that made the Cathari wars look like children's games. And then he saw what came after. The rebuilding. The memorials. The vows that such things would never happen again. but also, hidden in the data, the preparations, the weapons that were never dismantled, the plans that were never abandoned. The understanding buried deep in the human soul, that peace was a gift that had to be defended. When the sun rose over the Kethri capital, Verloc sat motionless in his chair, the crystal still glowing in his hand. He understood now why the humans had been so quiet. They were not broken. They were waiting, and he had helped to wake something that should have been left sleeping in the command center beneath the mountains. Admiral Cole watched the status boards turn green, one by one. 247 ships were in position. The technology was ready. The people were prepared. Sir, Commander Santos said quietly. We're ready. Cole nodded slowly. God forgive us for what we're about to do. He gave the order, and the galaxy began to change. The attack came without warning. A Cathari battle group, operating under Council authority, dropped out of hyperspace near a human medical station in disputed territory. The station was small, just a research facility studying diseases that affected multiple species. It had no weapons, no defenses, nothing but scientists and doctors, trying to help a galaxy that had turned its back on them. The Cathari commander gave no warning. His ships opened fire, and in less than 3 minutes, the station was gone. 217 people died in the vacuum of space, their bodies frozen among the debris. Among the dead was Dr. Benjamin Shaw, a man who had won every major prize in medical science. He had developed treatments for diseases that affected Cathari, the Shen, and Voran patients. He had saved more alien lives than any human in history. And now he was dead, killed by the species he had dedicated his life to helping. The news reached Earth within hours. It spread across every human world, every colony, every outpost in the spiral arm. For 6 months, humanity had endured insults and provocations with patience and grace. But this was different. This was murder. This was war in the command center beneath the mountains. Admiral Cole received the casualty list with a face carved from stone. He read every name, memorizing them, adding them to the list of people he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Sir, Commander Santos said, her voice tight with anger. Orders? Cole looked at the screens around him, the 247 ships waiting in hidden positions across the galaxy. They had been ready for months. The technology had been tested. The crews had been trained. Everything was in place. Open a channel, he said. Every frequency, every language. I want the entire galaxy to hear this. The broadcast went out 30 seconds later, cutting through every communication system in known space. On the Galactic Council station, delegates stopped their arguments and stared at their screens. On the Kethri homeworld, relics watched with growing horror. On 1,000 alien worlds, billions of beings heard the voice of a species they had tried to humble. To the Galactic Council and its member species, Cole began. His voice was calm, controlled, almost gentle. For 6 months, we have endured your provocations. We have accepted your insults. We have buried our dead and kept our peace. We did this because we hoped that wisdom would prevail. That hope died today, along with 217 of our people. Across the galaxy, the human fleet emerged from hiding. Ships materialized in systems that the Council had thought were safe, in positions that should have been impossible to reach. They were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Their designs were angular and aggressive, built for a single purpose. They made the most advanced Cathari warship look like a toy. We did not want this, Cole continued. We came to the stars seeking friendship and cooperation. We wanted to learn from you, to share our knowledge, to become part of your civilization. You chose to treat us as enemies. You chose to mock us, isolate us, and finally, murder us. That choice has consequences. The human fleet did not attack. Instead, a single ship broke formation and moved toward an uninhabited moon in Cathari space. The moon was small, perhaps 300 kilometers across, covered in ice and rock. It had no strategic value, no resources worth mining, nothing but silence and cold. The ship stopped 1,000 kilometers from the surface. A device activated. There was a flash of light, and then nothing. The moon was gone. not destroyed, not shattered into fragments. Gone. The space where it had existed was empty, as if the moon had never been there at all. Sensors across the galaxy registered a brief disturbance, and then silence. Project Awakening, Cole announced. This technology was designed as a deterrent, a weapon so terrible that no rational species would ever force us to use it. We developed it because we know, better than any species in this galaxy, what happens when war becomes total. We have seen the trenches. We have seen the camps. We have seen the mushroom clouds. We swore that such things would never happen again, but we also swore that we would never be victims. In the council chamber, High Arbiter Morvana's crystalline form flickered with distress. "This is impossible," she whispered. "How could they develop such technology in less than a century?" No one had an answer. "You have 24 hours, Cole said. "Withdraw all sanctions. Return all detained human citizens. Issue a formal apology for the unprovoked attack on our medical station, and ensure that nothing like this ever happens again." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made even the oldest species in the galaxy feel young. "We do not want war. We are not conquerors. We are not destroyers, but we are survivors. And we will not allow ourselves to be wiped from existence by species who decided that we did not deserve to exist." The broadcast ended on the colony world of New Portland. Katie Morris gathered her students and turned off the classroom screen. They were too young to understand what they had just witnessed. Too young to know that their species had just changed its place in the galaxy forever. "Miss Katie," Danny asked, "are the aliens still going to be mean to us?" Katie looked at her students, at their innocent faces, at the future they represented. "No, Danny, I don't think they are." In the Galactic Council chamber, chaos reigned. Species that had supported the campaign against humanity now scrambled to distance themselves from it. The Vorn delegation fled the station entirely, their ships jumping to hyperspace without clearance. The Thessian ambassador locked himself in his quarters and refused to answer communications. And Ambassador Vrelox sat alone in the darkness, watching the recording of the vanished moon play again and again. He had spent 6 months trying to break humanity. He had failed, and now the truth was clear to everyone. The galaxy had made a terrible mistake. They had poked a sleeping giant, and the giant had opened its eyes. There would be no more taunting, no more provocations, no more attempts to humble the young species from the spiral arm. Humanity had spoken, and the galaxy had no choice but to listen. The apology came in 18 hours. Ambassador Vrelox delivered it personally. Standing in the great chamber of the Galactic Council where he had once called for humanity's humiliation, his scales, which had glowed with pride and certainty 6 months ago, now seemed dull and gray. His voice, which had carried the weight of 10,000 years of Cathari supremacy, trembled like a child's. On behalf of the Cathari Dominion, the Galactic Council, and all species who participated in the campaign against humanity, I offer our deepest apologies, he said. We did not understand. We looked at your short history among the stars and saw children playing in waters too deep for them. We did not see the fire that had forged you. We did not understand what you truly are. Ambassador Patterson stood in the human section of the chamber, surrounded by the representatives of 47 colony worlds. She had waited 6 months for this moment, endured insults and provocations, and the deaths of people she had known and loved. She had every right to be angry, to demand more than words, to insist on punishment for those who had caused so much suffering. Instead, she stepped forward and accepted the apology with a grace that surprised everyone, including herself. The Cathari people are not our enemies, she said. The Veshan people are not our enemies. The Vorn, the Council, the entire galaxy is not our enemy. We have only one enemy, and that is the idea that any species has the right to determine which other species deserve to exist. She looked around the chamber. At the thousands of beings who had voted to break her people, we came to the stars seeking partners, not subjects. Teachers, not masters. Friends, not conquerors. That offer still stands. But from this day forward, it will be offered between equals. The formal agreements took weeks to finalize. All sanctions were lifted. all detained humans were returned. Reparations were paid to the families of the 217 who had died on the medical station. A memorial was built in neutral space, a simple structure of human design that listed every name. Dr. Benjamin Shaw was buried on Earth. In a small cemetery overlooking the ocean, thousands attended his funeral, including representatives from the very species whose lives he had spent his career saving. The Cathari ambassador laid flowers on his grave and wept without shame. In the aftermath, the full scope of human preparation was revealed to a stunned galactic community. The quiet months had not been spent cowering or despairing. They had been spent building, planning, and preparing for every possible outcome. Every human world had been fortified with defenses that the galaxy had never seen. Every human citizen had been trained in emergency protocols that dated back centuries. Every contingency had been considered, every possibility accounted for. High Arbiter Morvana requested a private meeting with Dr. Patricia Vance, the scientist who had developed Project Awakening. The ancient being wanted to understand how a species so young could have created something so powerful. Patricia received her in a simple office on Earth, with windows that looked out over green hills and blue sky. It was a beautiful day, the kind of day that made you forget that the universe could be cruel. "How long have you been preparing for this?" Morvana asked. Patricia considered the question carefully. "Since the day we looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there, we hoped we would find friends. We dreamed of being welcomed into a community of wisdom and peace, but we never forgot that the universe is not obligated to be kind. You expected us to attack you. You prepared for the possibility. There's a difference." Patricia walked to the window and looked out at the world she had helped to save. "We have a saying on Earth, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. We hoped that you would accept us as equals. We prepared for you to try to destroy us." Morvana's crystalline form flickered with something that might have been shame. "And the weapon? Project Awakening? Why build something so terrible?" "Because we know what we're capable of," Patricia said softly. "We've seen our own darkness. We've lived through wars that killed millions. We've built weapons that could end all life on our planet. We know exactly how terrible we can be when we have no other choice." She turned to face the ancient being. Project Awakening was never meant to be used. It was meant to ensure that we would never have to fight a war we couldn't win. A weapon so powerful that no one would ever force us to use it. You forced us to reveal it. Be grateful that we only demonstrated it on an empty moon. On the colony world of New Portland, life slowly returned to normal. The wheat fields swayed in the gentle breeze. Children played in the streets of small towns built by parents who had crossed the stars seeking a better life. The fear that had hung over everything for 6 months began to fade. Katie Morris continued to teach her students. But now her lessons included a new chapter. She told them about the day the galaxy learned that humanity was not to be taunted. She told them about the courage of those who had endured months of humiliation without losing their dignity. She told them about the 217 who had died, and the millions who had stood together in their memory. "Why did we wait so long?" Danny asked one afternoon. "Why didn't we just show them our weapons from the beginning?" Katie smiled at the boy who had grown so much in the past year. "Because that's not who we want to be, Danny. We want to be the species that makes friends, not enemies. The species that builds hospitals, not weapons. The species that offers help before asking for anything in return. But we have the weapons anyway." Yes. Because wanting peace doesn't mean being weak. It means being strong enough to choose peace, even when you have the power to choose war. Captain Samuel Ortiz retired from military service and returned to Earth, to a small town in what had once been called New Mexico. He built a house with his own hands, planted a garden, and spent his evenings watching the stars come out. Sometimes he thought about the galaxy out there, about the species who had tried to break humanity and failed. Mostly, he thought about the future, and whether his children's children would ever have to face what his generation had faced. Ambassador Atterson continued to serve for another decade, helping to build the new relationships that grew from the ashes of the old. She negotiated trade agreements that benefited all parties. She established cultural exchanges that allowed species to understand each other better. She worked tirelessly to ensure that the mistakes of the past would never be repeated, When she finally retired, she wrote a book about her experiences. She called it The Truth Came Too Late, and in it, she explained why humanity had responded the way it had. "We are not a perfect species," she wrote in the final chapter. "We have our flaws, our failures, our dark chapters. But we have something that many older species seem to have forgotten. We never give up. We never stop hoping. And we never let anyone tell us that we don't deserve to exist." The book was translated into thousands of languages and read across the galaxy. It changed the way many species thought about the young primates from the spiral arm. It helped to heal wounds that had seemed permanent, but for Katie Morris, the truth was simpler. She saw it every day in the faces of her students, in their laughter and their questions and their endless curiosity. Humanity had survived because they refused to accept that survival was impossible. They had endured because they believed that tomorrow could be better than today, and they had won because, in the end, hope was stronger than fear. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Some species learned it too late and paid the price for their arrogance. But most learned it in time and found that humanity made better friends than enemies. The stars shone down on 1,000 worlds, where humans and aliens lived together in peace. It was not a perfect peace, not always an easy peace, but it was a peace built on mutual respect, on the understanding that every species had the right to exist, and that, in the end, was the only truth that mattered.